At the time of recording this, I have published the thumbnail inside my Discord, and I asked everybody, hey, which champion do you think this is? And I promised them that I'd give them a shout out if they successfully guessed it. So if you see some names pop up down below here, those were the people that successfully guessed it inside the Discord. If no names pop up, then nobody successfully guessed who we're talking about today. So if you're a fan of those sorts of challenges, or if you just want to get in on a pretty fantastic raid community so far, Discord link is down in the description as well. Of course, feel free to hop in there. We have a lot of experienced as well as newer players, Krakens, free-to-plays, everything like that. So it's absolutely awesome. That being said, though, today we are talking about a champion that absolutely helped to progress my Faction Wars content, and this is even going to be as a late game player. So I did complete every single Faction War. I've had Lydia for quite some time, as you'd know if you've been following the channel or whatnot. If it's your first time here, though, welcome. But what makes Faction Wars interesting? Well, it's generally the champions that you go against, and the champions you go against can sometimes be problematic, which is where today's pick or today's champion comes in. So she is going to be from the Demon Spawn faction, which will help to narrow down who this champion is for some of you if you're trying to guess as we go. But the reason why she's so important is if we take a look at one of these legendaries here, I forget which faction he's in. I think he's Bannerlord. So if we come in here and take a look at Black Knight, you're facing on almost every single Faction Wars stage at one point or another for each faction, right? And what makes him very annoying is that he places an unkillable on himself for one turn if incoming damage exceeds 15% of his max HP in one attack. There's obviously other super annoying champions that you end up facing as well, right? So a perfect example would be, of course, Valkyrie from the Barbarians faction. So her, with her passive, every time you're getting buffed, she also has the AoE shield and counterattack that's super annoying, especially if you don't have a very tanky team. So overall, there's a lot of annoying champions you can be facing inside Faction Wars. And as we look through Demon Spawn, especially with a lot of the champions that players might have, there's kind of inherently a lot of turn meter reduction that is built in here, right? So especially if you're looking at the epic level. So you have Allure, which is somebody I run all the time in my Faction Wars. You have obviously Skimfos, who's doing a lot of turn meter control, all that sort of stuff. And the reason turn meter control is important in this situation is because if you have a Black Knight that goes ahead and places the unkillable on himself, and then you have an Allure who just keeps A1ing and A1ing and A1ing into him, you're probably never going to get that unkillable off, which means you're going to come back from horizontal cuddling or something like that 30 minutes later, and you're going to find out that you haven't been able to progress past the Black Knight on stage 1 because he placed the unkillable on himself. So that leaves a few options for you to potentially deal with this problem. And I think the champion that most people think we're going to be talking about is probably Umbral Enchantress, who is a very good pick for this particular role because, of course, she has an AoE block buffs on a 3-turn cooldown for 3 turns, which is very strong. And then she does also have a provoke for 2 turns. This doesn't do anything to stop the buffs from being placed, though, right? But her A2 is very solid for this. As you can see, people are quite high on her inside Faction Wars, at least. But Umbral is not who we are talking about. So if you already clicked off the video, well, too bad. You'll never know, I guess. But who we're talking about today is Peydma. Peydma is kind of the forgotten sister of Umbral, I would say. She looks just as cool, though, in my opinion. Very similar character models, and she has a very unique kit that actually works quite well for this particular situation. She has very decent base stats as well, especially for an OG epic. So 17, almost 18k HP, almost 1300 defense, 101 base speed is pretty strong. She has an A1, attacks one enemy 2 times. If the attack is critical, has a 100% chance of placing a decreased attack debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Damage is based on defense and attack, so you can essentially double scale her, get some additional damage out of her. I don't have her built for damage, just so we're clear, but this is incredibly strong. Obviously, she is a Void Affinity champion, so there's no situation where this will not be critical if you have her built with 100% crit rate, especially inside PvE, right? She's always going to be able to get those critical hits. There's no, reaction or anything crazy like that you have to worry about, at least not at this time, but I'm sure there will be once Faction War Hard go live. She has an A2, attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a decreased accuracy debuff for 2 turns. A pretty crappy A2, in all honesty. It's a very, very low chance of placing this debuff. In today's meta, we'd kind of expect to see this just at 100% chance, certainly once it's booked, right? So, but the skill that makes her really interesting is going to be her A3, Appropriate, attacks one enemy, removes all buffs from the target on a 4-turn cooldown and places them on this champion. Damage based on defense. This is perfect. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. This is exactly what we need to make our Faction Wars team consistent as all hell, because she's removing the buffs, she's void affinity, doesn't matter, right? So if she was an affinity champion who has the attack one enemy, remove all buffs, there's a chance she can weak hit, in which case you have to wait for the turns to cycle and, you know, get back to this skill. But she's a void champion who can do this inside your Demon Spawn Faction Wars, and she's one of the only champions from Demon Spawn, certainly the only champion that I have, I believe, that is actually able to go ahead and remove a buff once it's been placed. And essentially with the other champions, what they do is they can prevent like the placement of a buff, but they can't remove the buff, if that makes sense. So remove buffs, she doesn't actually show up, which is a bit interesting because I guess it doesn't count as remove buffs, which doesn't make sense. But yeah, so if we look at steel buffs, okay, so she shows up for steel buffs. That makes sense. So we have no remove buffs champions on my account, and I have every epic from the Demon Spawn. I have every rare, I believe, and then I have a lot of the legendaries as well. So there's no remove buffs champions, right? There's one steel buff champion, which is her, and then obviously if we look at like even the block buff champions, so debuffs will come in here, right? If it'll let me expand it, good God. There we go, block buffs. This is what we have for options. So obviously you're going back to, you know, Umbral Enchantress is an option, but she's also another Void Epic, so the chances you have her are a little bit lower. And then the issue with this is you're really depending on the AI to do a good job cycling this. So first of all, she's going to have to be faster, especially than your damage dealing champions. If you end up removing a piece of gear from her at some point or something like that, it might mess up your speed tune, of course, because if the nukers go first and then Black Knight or, you know, somebody else places a block damage or an unkillable on themselves, then she can't remove it. She just places the block buffs, right? You also have Tiramisu, who can come in and do this role, but not everybody's going to have her, even at the time of creating this video. That being said, though, she's very competent for this role. However, once again, she does not remove the buffs, she does not strip, she simply places a block buffs and a true fear. So Peydma is the only champion inside this entire faction that can remove a buff once it's been placed, which is just absolutely insane. And that's not counting, obviously, options like, for example, you know, Helicath, who's ignoring block damage and stuff like that because it's very situational. Of course, Prince Kaimar can also remove the buffs, right? And a lot of players will have him, but there's a very good chance that you're like me and you don't have him either, right? So it's very important that you do have another option that can do this, because Demon Spawn, I'd essentially have to go and farm a lower wave because I just didn't have the option to get through it, and I wasn't going to sit there on manual and do it, right? So let's go ahead, let's hop into a dungeon real quick. Let's do like Dragon 20 just to kind of show off what Peydma looks like. Certainly not going to really do a damage test or anything like that because she's not, you know, really in your team for damage. She's there for her utility, right? So we'll get super raids off, and we'll just go ahead and take a look at what her animations and everything look like, just so you can kind of get an idea of the champion as well. She's super cool though. So her A3, very quick animation, just smacks into them there, right? That steals it. So obviously you just want to have her with accuracy. She gets the decreased accuracy placed on the enemy team, which, as you can see there, is actually helping her resist some of the debuffs that might be coming her way, which is pretty cool. And then the A1 is just kind of, you know, a basic smack. So nothing too crazy. Let me go ahead and show you the build that I have on her if you're curious about how she's built on my account. And what's really nice about this is when you get to a late enough stage in the game, you don't have to put all your best gear on these champions to make them work. So I have no relics, I have no blessing. She is fully booked though, and I also have no masteries. So I don't plan on mastering her out, I don't think. These are the stats though. So she's got 40k HP, 3200 defense, very good build for survivability. Speed is 229. I don't have to care about how fast she is, right? She can go before, she can go after, she can go in between my damage dealers. Does not matter. She is removing buffs. She doesn't have to go first. Obviously, I don't have her with any crit rate. That's probably where I'd improve this build a little bit if I were critiquing because you can get that decreased attack on her A1, which is absolutely fantastic if you're struggling to progress inside Faction Wars and just need some more survivability, right? Because reducing the amount of damage the enemy team does in a lot of cases by like 50% is pretty crazy. And then 425 on the accuracy. I, of course, do have, I think, some bonuses to the area, so she gets like 8 additional accuracy, 2% ignore defense, and then 2 extra speed. Nothing too crazy, so a very attainable build for most players, I think. Certainly once you start putting feral gear on her and stuff like that too, because the accuracy that you get from even just the one piece of it is such a boost. I, of course, have the maxed out Great Hall, which helps a ton as well, but overall, I think she is an absolutely fantastic champion, and I don't think many people talk about her, especially in today's meta, although this is certainly a very important role going forward. And considering the amount of champions, or the lack of champions rather, that remove buffs inside this faction, I would imagine that when Hard Faction Wars comes out, there's going to be some sort of, you know, buffs that get placed, certainly within the waves, maybe even on the boss, that is essentially going to be something that we have to remove, right? And there's not many champions that can do it, so maybe consider building her out before that goes live. We'll have to see, though. I, of course, don't have access to any information. You don't. This is all just, well, that part was speculation. Fantastic champion, though. Highly recommend building her out. She's going to help you farm stage 21 and 20 very consistently if you're at that point in the game. As always, though, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.